in the 90s. This would have been 1994 to 1995. At that point, we were supposed to be able to fight these two wars, and they changed it from simultaneously to near simultaneously. We went back up and presented a study that we'd done that said we needed 563,000 soldiers in the United States Army, in the regular Army, in order to fight these two near simultaneous conflicts. And we were told, well, you're not going to get those. You're only going to get 495,000.
Yeah.
So we said, well, if we don't have them on hand, it's going to be very difficult. Well, you have the National Guard. And we said, yeah, but it'll take 6 months to a year before the National Guard ramps up to the point where you can send them into action. We went through that during World War II and World War I. We're not going to be able to do that very well. They said, well, there's new technology coming, and that'll compensate for the lack of manpower. I guess what I'm trying to tell you is it was always a lie. We were never able to fight two wars near simultaneously, never. And so I think that's the first part of the question. Second part is what happened to the greatest that Trump talks about all the time. By the way, remember, he's also told us that he personally rebuilt it all during his first term, remember?
Right.
Which, of course, is complete and utter nonsense.
You were in the DOD for a while in his first term, am I right?
Yeah, and that was just complete nonsense. I think you simply have an example of a very large and expensive military establishment that over many, many years was reduced in size without making any accommodations with change that new technology, new forms of warfare required. And so it's a very wonderful, small but wonderful tribute to the armed forces of the Second World War and the Cold War. Nothing's changed. And it didn't really matter what we did in most cases when you were dealing with these smaller states where we chose to intervene. We were overwhelmingly powerful. There wasn't a great deal they could do about it. And I think they misjudged Iran. They thought they were dealing with another Iraq or Syria or Saudi Arabia or Libya, and they weren't. And they've gotten an education the hard way. And now, instead of recognizing the limits of our power and the prudent action that should be taken, which is to disengage and get out of this mess, I'm afraid we're doubling down on failure. About that, or offer this caveat. They are aware that we are a large and powerful, historically hegemonic power since the end of the Second World War that is in decline. I think they recognize that. We were always struggling for dominance with the Soviet Union, but when the Soviet Union collapsed, we were the last man standing. Our allies had largely disarmed themselves, as you know, and so we were the only ones out there with any significant military power. And I think they became sort of inebriated with power. The results of Desert Storm led them to the conclusion there was no one else out there that could stand against us, and that this was a relatively permanent condition. So we didn't do our jobs, we didn't do our homework. Nietzsche once said that war makes the victor stupid. In other words, winning and winning decisively is almost worse than losing, because you learn nothing and you conclude that you're something you are not. And that's what we did when we embarked on this war with Iran. And I got into a polite disagreement with a friend the other day who was trying to say, well, that General Kane, he tried to talk to the president about the limits of air power and all this sort of thing. I said, wait a minute. Anyone with any sense at all, any professional depth would have said, this is the dumbest idea possible. Mr. President, don't do this. This will wreck your presidency. We will waste time, money, and resources on a campaign we don't need to fight, that we can't win, at least not exclusively with air and missile power. But he was an airman, remember? And every airman privately believes that they can ultimately replace everyone in the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps, that all they need are airplanes and missiles, and they can do it all. So he wasn't about to say, no, I don't think we should do this. He may have said we're going to have to, it's going to be tough, but we'll supply the target sets and see how this goes. It should never have started, Judge. It should never have occurred. And you saw this comment that I guess came out of CENTCOM headquarters. I think Larry was the first to, Larry Johnson was one of the first to break it, that, the CENTCOM commander was, and his J2, his intelligence officer, were looking for new, innovative ways to punish Iran.
There it is. Creative and unconventional ideas. Admiral Cooper sent that to more than 100,000 members of the military.
I mean, if this is not amateur hour on steroids, I don't know what is. Remember, this was not a war that was forced on us. We initiated this at Israel's, insistence, obviously, and the Israel lobby. There's no question about that. But nevertheless, we initiated it. And now we're saying, gosh, we've run out of ideas, guys. We don't have any more good targets. What do you think we should do? This is insane. Driving forces behind this mechanism. One is Israel and the Israel lobby and the people backing the Israel lobby who put Donald Trump into power with the expressed wish that he take on Iran and destroy it for Israel. Israel's hegemony, its supremacy in the region, cannot be established as long as there is a powerful Iranian state. They misled the president. They presented utter nonsense that he eagerly inhaled, and that's another story. But that's why we got into this to begin with. Now we're dealing with something else that I think affects probably President Trump and probably also President or Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's what I call the gambler's fallacy. If I can just roll one more time, I know I've won before, I can win again. I know this will work. And we are also watching as large numbers of aircraft are being sent back to the theater. And I think before long, we're going to find out that every B-52, every B-1, every B-2 is going to be loaded up with everything they can carry. And we are going to go after Iran with a vengeance in the belief that this time we'll get it right. Now, what most people don't understand is we've already done this for all intents and purposes. I listened to Mike Pence, the former vice president, say, well, we just need to take the gloves off of the armed forces. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. We've already done as much as we can do. But there is this belief, I think, in Trump's head that we can do more. And this time around, we'll get it right. The regime or the government, which I prefer to use, of Iran will collapse. The society will disintegrate. I don't agree with that, but I think that's where we are. I think it is more effective in its military power because they have been resupplied and they have manufactured new weapons and equipment. They've refined their tactics. There's no question about that. They can defend themselves, and they've demonstrated that they can defend themselves at far less cost than anything we would spend, because we're really not interested in defense. We're building an offensive force posture. It's designed to crush everybody anywhere, anytime that doesn't agree with this or doesn't want to go along with us. So, for a fraction of what we spend, the Russians, the Iranians, the Chinese have all built various forms of the military power that you've seen in action. And I think the world understands that. And that's going to remove us from the category of global hegemon. And if you listen to some of the retired generals, they aren't talking as much as they did originally about Israel, even though that's the driving force behind everything. They're now saying that if we don't win this, our position as the global hegemon is at risk. Well, no, they're wrong. It's over. Our hegemony is effectively ending. And they think this is a terrible thing, that if we can't control the world is a danger to us. I don't think the world needs to be controlled by us or anybody else. But that's the minority opinion. He signed that, and he made the comment, I don't intend to end up as Herbert Hoover and send the world into a global depression. That we all thought this was wonderful. Man gets it. He understands that we're not alone on planet Earth and that this has terrible consequences for the rest of the people that live here. And that was a great thing. And as you say, it was rapidly turned around. And that's why I say this war is not going to end. Now, Well, why would the Iranians talk to us? First of all, the Iranian government is amenable, I think, to discussions if we want to have them, and we're serious. Right now, they don't see any evidence that we're serious. If you send back a puppet of the same lobby, I I think they would like to see peace restored. I think they want to get back to doing business with the world. Remember, they did not start this war. And I know everybody says, well, they've been at war for us for 47 years. That's nonsense. If anything, I think we're the ones that have been at war with them for 47 years. I remember officers in 1980 talking about the fact that the Iranians were like the Bolsheviks and they had to be stopped because they'll want to expand. And then we began supporting this man, Saddam Hussein, whom you remember we tried subsequently to remove and eventually did. But we bankrolled him. He built up an enormous army. He inflicted 500, 750,000 casualties, several hundred thousand dead on the Iranians, all in an attempt to do what we wanted him to do. So this business of who started what, I think is nonsense. So I think at this point, the population of Iran will not tolerate any serious negotiation. They've made that pretty clear. And yes, the population does have a voice in its government, contrary to what we're saying. Yes. A good friend of mine, I guess we have the problem with the ed book, and no we, Chris. I don't know what happened.
All right, I can hear you clearly. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm getting an echo from this end. Anyway, a good friend of mine who spent many years in the defense industry made a point the other day in an email to me. He was listening to everybody complain about the failure of the scientific industrial base to produce missiles and essentially meet the president's demands and demands of our military. He pointed something out that I think is very important that we don't mention. First of all, there's never been a declaration of war. Without a declaration of war, you can't arbitrarily mobilize the nation's industries. In other words, you can't do what we did in 1942 and essentially mobilize everyone to produce for military use. So you're stuck with assembly lines, if you will, manufacturing processes that are laborious, that take time. Building Jeeps and Sherman tanks is easy. Building complex missiles designed to be launched from aircraft or ships or on land at a great distance with precision, that's a much tougher problem. We're not up to it at this point. And frankly, it's because we went into this half-cocked, believing we were dealing with another weak opponent. So the first thing is, yes, we've run through our stocks, and those stocks are dangerously low. Now, secondly, the petroleum issue. This is a big one these days. People are all saying, you said you were going to go into a crisis. Well, let me make some points here about the petroleum.
Colonel, can I stop you right here?
A barrel of oil coming off the ship in port is $140 a barrel. So that's considerably higher than the paper price on Wall Street. Yes, the strategic petroleum reserves are being run down, not just here, but all over the globe. We have halted any exports of fuel because we're going to need all of it here. We're that close to the edge. Our refineries have been operating at full capacity, but we can't afford to supply the whole world. It's just impossible. And of course, stupidly, we and the British and the Germans and French have provided the Ukrainians with long-range missiles and drones that are being used to strike the petroleum refining industry in Russia. I mean, it's just a very dumb idea. By the way, we're also buying Russian oil, so it makes you wonder what the hell we're thinking.
Yeah.
That's part of the issue. The other issue, though, is that economically and financially, our position is very fragile now. We haven't talked a lot about it, but in addition to oil, which is very important, and you're seeing the supply chains adjust and reorient. In other words, people are structuring for the future, which doesn't really include us. We're seen as a menace that's going to undermine or subvert the global structure, the global economic structure. That's one problem. Second problem is our currency. We just shipped I don't know how many billions of euros from a euro slush fund somewhere inside our government that I'm not familiar with to boost the Japanese financial system, to essentially rescue the yen from destruction. Well, that's a temporary fix, Judge. It's not going to fix the problem in Japan, just as we can't fix many of the problems that we confront right now. Uh, Everything is temporary. Everything is a quick fix to get through the next quarter, and that's not going to work. And then finally, we have these people in the White House that surround President Trump and others on the Hill that I'm sure are part of this, who have benefited enormously from shorting oil through the series of ups and downs that President Trump has taken us in the oil markets. I think that too is coming to an end. I think we're not going to be able to manipulate the markets in the future the way we have to this point. Reality is going to strike home. And I don't know what that's going to do to the dollar, because the world, as we know, is increasingly de-dollarizing. And so I wonder about the entire system. And then finally, you have this strange phenomenon. On the one hand, you have interest rates that are rising, and at the same time, the bond yields are rising. Normally, when interest rates go up, bond yields go down, but they're not going down. And when you raise this, people are saying, "Oh, don't worry about that. That'll fix itself." Well, it's not fixing itself, and everybody knows once you hit that 5% mark on the 10-year bond yield, you're in a lot of trouble because you can't service the debt, and the servicing the debt's well over $1 trillion at this point.
Right. The debt will be.
He would welcome that, because they then become targets in Israel, and that promises to bind us ever more closely to Israel and his destiny. So I'm a little surprised at that. The answer is, of course, yes. Look, what has happened is very simple. The United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, all of these places, Saudi Arabia, they've all come to the same conclusion. We cannot protect them. And if your hegemonic military power proves unequal to the task of protecting them, then it's time for the hegemonic military power to get the hell out. And I think what they're going to do is tell us to go. And indeed, we should, because the longer we remain, the more often they become targets. And remember, Iran has made it crystal clear that if we resume the attacks on them and do the things that President Trump has threatened he will do with the weapons at hand, that they will annihilate, destroy, remove, whatever you want to use for a word, the remaining oil infrastructure in the Gulf region and Saudi Arabia. You have the Houthis that are now making life very, very interesting in the Red Sea for the Saudis. I see no end in sight for that. So the point is that things will not go back to normal whenever this ends. In fact, things will be much bleaker. The world will have to adapt to a very different world. And by the way, once it's made clear to us that we've got to get out, there's only one power on the planet left that can actually finance the restoration or rebuilding of all that infrastructure: China.
Right, right.